I actually contribute my early life in Highlands to my decision on a career. I know that my mother wanted me to be an architect, not landscape, an architect. So she had me scheduled to go to Princeton to become the world's greatest architect. But after the Second World War, when I got out of the Army, I had the GI Bill, and I could go any place I wanted to and study anything I wanted to. What I really wanted to study was something about the natural world, and I fell into biology at Duke University, and I fell in love with the study of trees and plants and how they're all put together into a forest. And so that's how I got interested in forestry itself. So in my studies of forestry, I became much more interested in the parts, how a forest works, than actually cutting down the trees and cutting up into lumber and grinding them up into paper. So I kind of became a conservationist within the forestry movement. And that I carried through my teaching in universities, and after I've retired, that's mainly what I've been concerned with, was the non-timber aspects of forestry. There's plenty of timber out there, and but that always, for most forestry operations, the timber has taken the primary road, and the non-timber aspects of the forest have taken a secondary role. And so I've been always pushing for the non-timber aspects, particularly the forest as a whole. You see, the forest is very often can't see the forest for the trees. They're looking at the trees, and they don't see the rest of it. And they say, well, it's okay, if we cut the trees down, the forest will grow back. And the trees grow back, but it takes a long, long, long time for the rest of the critters and the plants and animals and everything else to evolve into that forest. It can take as long as, 500 years for a mature forest to really become mature. It can look pretty good in 50 or 60 years. And most of the forests around Highlands are actually only 60 to 100 years old, because they were logged over and cut over 100 years ago. And they look pretty good today, and most people think they are virgin forests, and actually they're not. The plants grow very fast here. Trees grow really tall and very big very quickly, and so that even an old cornfield that was a cornfield in the 1930s or 40s is now grown up into trees, and it looks pretty good. And that should be preserved as possible, because in another 50 years there will be lots of other things besides trees there that will eventually come in and belong to that. And this is kind of where I have evolved to in my thinking. As a teenager, we loved the natural forest, and then as a professional forester, I evolved through the timber aspects of it, and finally gotten back to loving the natural forest again in my old age. So you kind of go back to childhood in a different way. What I began to see about the natural environment here, not only in the Highlands area, but basically pretty much, globally, was back in the 1960s and 70s. Humans were pretty much destroying the natural environment, and we were losing a lot of the diversity, natural diversity we had. Things were becoming too homogeneous in the sense of trees were being cut down and development was being developed, and just here in Highlands, like all the rest of the country, and you could see what we were losing very rapidly back 20, 30 years ago, and it's still going on today. But this really got me motivated to try to do something about it. So you approach it from several places. One might be politically, another one might be to go through scientific ways, and other one might be just to become an environmental, so-called environmental activist, which I kind of did all three of these at one time. I kind of meshed them together. And this is kind of the approach I was taking to look at how we might be able to preserve some of what we did have left. Now, we have to remember when that early on, I mean, what we have now and what we had 30 years ago was basically what survived the huge amount of destruction that was taking place in the last century and 2 centuries ago, where forests were being cut down, mowed down, and rivers were running red with silt, and farms were everywhere, all through the Piedmont and here in the mountains. There was a lot of wildfires, and things were just not, the natural environment was pretty well badly disturbed by that time. There was very little undisturbed land by the middle of this last century, like by 1950, so that but things were growing back and things were recovering pretty well, so that by the 1960s and 70s there was a lot of recovery on the landscape. And this is basically what we're trying to preserve today. Not the old, we don't have any old original forest anymore. As the regrowth occurs and as old burned areas recover and as cut over forests grow back, why not only do the trees come back, but the animals come with them, and the herbaceous plants and the wildflowers. These are the kind of things that make up the natural system out there. And this is what we hopefully are trying to keep what we have, what has recovered from past disturbances, and is looking pretty good today. Another 50 years and we'll be back to a lot of very nice old forest and pretty well-stocked forests with lots of species, animals and so on, if they're not in little tiny islands. So another problem is that we tend to isolate little tiny patches of natural area, and that's not very good. All of the species of animals and plants in little patches, they have to be able to move to other little patches, and that's hard to do in terms of maintaining their genetic diversity. Have to have outbreeding, not inbreeding. The highlands area and the highlands plateau are particularly susceptible to the loss of biological diversity, which is what we're trying to keep together here and preserve. And as it's particularly susceptible to that because of development here. But we have a lot to preserve that has recovered from previous damaging, environmental damage. The point is that the Highlands Plateau and most of the southern Appalachians are well known and well documented to have a great amount of biological value to locally and to the planet as a whole, because we're dealing here with our life support system in terms of the forests and the natural environment. The Highlands Plateau is particularly important within the southern Appalachians. It's quite unique in that we do have, because of the high rainfall and the different elevational differences, and of course the rainfall here is extremely high, which even a drought year we have as much as 60 inches of rain, which is as much or more than they have during wet years down off of the mountain. So that, and we have north slopes and south slopes and rocky exposed areas and deep coves, lots of different habitats, and a great many species of plants and animals that have evolved here. And that's why Highlands is especially important. Of course, the biological station was located here primarily because of all of this natural diversity that we have. And this is what we need to preserve, what we have left. Over the last 20 or 30 years, we have destroyed quite a bit of it. I won't name anything specifically, but I think most of us know that with development going as it is, without any kind of county zoning controls or things like that, that we could lose much of the diversity that we have. So that is, and there's quite a bit of it still here that has recovered from the past abuses of the last century. So that, and what we can hang on to would be good. And so we need to pick up as much of that as possible.